Welcome to the Retail Smarts podcast. I'm your host, Dominique Lamb. Well, welcome back to our listeners. Today is an incredibly important day. It's International Women's Day, and we have an incredibly amazing guest that I'm so excited about speaking to. Today with us, we have Senator Coral Hanson-Young, who's joined us from Adelaide. She's a very, very busy woman, and we are just so excited to have you on our Retail Smarts podcast.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, Dominic. It's just so wonderful to be here. And I think on a day like this, International Women's Day, where I'm in the business of social change, and I tell you what, the real change makers out there are women. And whether it's the women who work in the retail sector or the women who support the retail sector, it is women across our lives and our communities that are really the ones with the influence and power to make this world the way we want it to be. So I'm really keen to get into some of that over this chat.
I have been a big fan of yours for some time and have been watching kind of your just emergence because, I mean, you are doing some amazing things. And I hear that you grew up in a regional town. So maybe we'll start back where it all began. I mean, what was it like growing up in a regional town?
Yeah, I grew up in a small country town in country Victoria, actually, and went to the local high school there. I grew up at a time where the forest debate was really heated in Victoria. The dairy industry was kind of very prominent, and they were the two industries in town. There was the logging industry and the dairy industry, and I learned really quickly that one of the best things about being in a small town and a small community is that when stuff needs to be done, people just get together and do it. And I think from that is what really born my interest in community, in politics, in social service and public service. And it also taught me a lot about diplomacy because I came from a family where my parents were environmentalists, and so learning to kind of talk to those families whose parents were in the logging industry, you had to find other things to connect over and not be kind of driven by a divergence of your parents' careers or where the income came from. I think small towns can teach you a lot about respecting people regardless of their differences.
It's so interesting to hear you say that because we talk a lot at the moment about, this concept of divergence and everybody, being separated by something. I mean, today, it's very much about the Ukraine and Russia, or it could be about, being vaccinated or not being vaccinated or whatever it is. Can you think of a time where you really had to hone those skills and where it enabled you to kind of change, I guess, a relationship or just a connection with a person?
Yeah. Look, I think, since I came into politics, and I came in quite young, I was the youngest woman elected, and I came in with a whole lot of ideas and passion about the way I, wanted to help the world and the issues that I'm passionate about. But I had to, of course, you kind of get thrown in. I was 25, 26. I had a baby on my hip at the time because I'd been pre-selected and elected at the same time as having my daughter Cora, all a bit of a surprise and a whirlwind. And I had to learn that everyone comes to politics, most people, because they actually want to do something to fix the world. They're passionate about their communities. And while we might not all have the same ideas about how things should be done or what the solutions are, most people come to it from the same point in their hearts and in their minds. And, everyone's, wanting to do their best. I was given the immigration portfolio early on, and that is very controversial, of course. I was very passionate about looking after vulnerable people, particularly refugees. I've been watching what's going on in terms of Russia and Ukraine at the moment, and just, my heart goes out to all of those families who woke up only a few days ago realising that actually their world is not what they thought. And now, a lot of them fleeing and crossing, trying to get across the border. That to me and trying to communicate those struggles, those human instincts, what makes us a family, those things are not unique to one group of people or another. Actually, they're values that we all hold. They're human values. And so I've often had to kind of use storytelling and personal stories to help connect with people that perhaps have a different point of view. And immigration portfolio is one. The climate debate, of course, used to be very controversial. Nowadays, I feel like most people understand that pollution is an issue and we've got to deal with it, because otherwise our kids are going to be left with a planet that's too hot to live in, and too dangerous. So I think the main thing is not to beat people up because they have a different idea of you. Find a way to connect, and then part of the process of changing hearts and minds is also giving people a license to accept new information. I remember when I took on the case relating to David Leyonhjelm. He was that former senator who had harassed me in the parliament. And when I stood up and first called that out, I had male members of the parliament come up to me and really apologise that they'd never kind of stood up and spoken out about it before. And I remember thinking, oh, hang on, here's a moment where I could have just said, well, thanks for nothing. Or I could hear them out. And what I heard really clearly was they didn't know what to do. They thought that I seemed to be handling it okay. They didn't want to kind of intervene because they didn't, one bloke said to me, I didn't want to embarrass you anymore. I thought you had it under control. I'm really sorry. I wished I'd stood up and said something. That acknowledgement is actually more powerful than people who have just always held the same view all the time. And that's what change really is.
It's interesting to hear you talk about that, because I think that, as a young woman coming into a leadership role at a similar age that you entered Parliament, there is this kind of concept that we've got this, right? Like if you get to that level, if you are that leader, if you're put in that position, then you absolutely have the skills and the know-how, and you're prepared for what is about to come. And I think that is absolutely untrue. I think that what in many cases women are faced with as they walk through that door is nothing that you're necessarily prepared for. And I think, on International Women's Day, the big thing right now is let's break the bias, but how do we prepare women better for what is a time that, unfortunately from what we've seen from, the federal parliament recently, it's not ready for equity. We're not there yet. We're absolutely not yet there yet. I mean, what do we tell women to keep them coming and to keep them stepping up?
Well, I think a couple of things. Firstly, you're right. We're nowhere near there. There's so much that still needs improvement. But I can see positive change happening. And I think that in and of itself, it gives me hope. And I hope it gives other people hope as well, because if we don't see change actually occurring, then you kind of wonder, is this all worth it? Change is happening, but it's not inevitable, and you have to be engaged. You've got to fight for it. You've got to pick those moments when it's the right time to stand up and say, no, I've had enough of this. I think we do need more young women in leadership across, all sectors, and women in general, but particularly young women. And I think one of the things that's really inspiring to me at the moment is seeing a number of young women stepping forward and saying their piece, whether that's Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins and Chanel Contos have all kind of got in there in the last 12 months and really charted a course for themselves. Or indeed somebody like who I've gotten to know over the last year, Christine Holgate, who is, a very senior woman in business who has, been around a long time, seen a lot of crap, I'd imagine, and finally went, nah, I'm not putting up with this anymore. So that in of itself is giving others inspiration. I think the main thing is when somebody does stand up and when they do, or they step through that door and they take that opportunity, the main thing everybody else needs to do is to not let them stand there on their own. It takes a lot of effort to kind of put yourself out there as a leader, and you need to know that You've got people backing you and will be there for, in those moments that you stuff up as well, or those moments you're just not sure and you need some reassurance as a sounding board. I think what I've seen over the years, and I felt this when I first came into politics, that I didn't know where to turn for the people who would be there for me if I was wavering or I'd made a mistake or I'd misjudged something. I felt the whole time I was kind of on edge about, what happens if I stuff this up. I think those of us who have been through that now have a responsibility to be there to catch people and to help them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, that is some of the difficulty, because I think, when you walk through that door, I think there's some expectation that, well, now I've got to prove them wrong. Like I've got to get this right, and I can't be seen to be leaning on people or.
We tell ourselves that, right?
Yeah, I think we tell ourselves that.
We tell each other this, we tell ourselves this. Do you reckon blokes turn around and go, oh, no, I'm never going to lean on anyone. I'm not going to do anything. This is all me. I mean, no one gets there on their own. And I think we can't be fooled into thinking that women have to do it on our own as an individual without support, that you're isolated, that you have to be 110, 200% better than, the last person, that everybody's waiting for you to fail. Men fail all the time. So let's give ourselves a break.
Perhaps, though, we don't notice as much because we stand out when we do.
Yes.
Because there's so few of us up there. But
that's true. That's true. Yeah.
I wonder, for me, I've been spending a bit of time kind of ruminating about this, particularly around International Women's Day. But I guess, and I'm sure I know you've experienced it, coming into a leadership role as a young woman, there is unfortunately some level of objectification that occurs when it comes to your age, your sex, all of those things. There have been times where very well-respected colleagues of mine have pulled me aside and said, well, what people talk about, what men talk about it, late at night in bars when it comes to you, it's got very little to do with your qualifications or what you're doing or anything like that. I genuinely thought when I had a child that would end. But as it turns out, the further away from childbearing it doesn't. It actually just kind of comes back again, but then you have an additional expectation where you're judged as a mother. Is this something that you have experienced, or is it just me?
No, that's absolutely something that I think women, particularly those who step into leadership roles, but I think women across lots of sectors are like that. And particularly if you start to build a bit of, your work is based on your qualifications or your, peer endorsement, a public profile, that kind of demeaning of one's ability based on, yes, the looks, the tone. Do you smile enough? Do you not? How quickly did you fall pregnant? How quickly did you get yourself back in shape afterwards? I mean, these are all conversations and comments that are made which just never occur, or very, very rarely, and they don't dominate in the same way to undermine the ability of men in leadership. I think this is still something, when we talk about we've still got a long way to go, it's these types of issues that continue to undermine. And of course, my experience in the Parliament, a lot of the harassment that I have now spoken out about, but I didn't at the time for a long time, because I was worried that there was a sense of, oh, she can't hack it. So I just have to suffer this in silence and pretend it's not happening, ignore it. And a lot of it was that really sexualized bullying about my appearance, who I apparently was sleeping with, why I wasn't sleeping with anyone, what kind of mother I was, who was I being a single mum, bringing my, kid to Canberra to do my job. There was a really kind of sexualized element to the bullying and the harassment that I received. And I don't think that's unique to politics at all.
No, it's absolutely not unique to politics. And in fact, I've had, almost identical experiences in the sense that, I've been questioned about whether it was appropriate for my child to be with a nanny while being in federal parliament doing my job, advocating for retailers. I've been, questioned about, how much time I spend with my children, amongst other things. It's certainly not something that's just unique, unfortunately, to politics at all. Can I ask, though, when you said the part about, are they going to think I can't hack it? When you did speak out, did anyone say that you couldn't?
That was the most amazing part for me, because I was so scared, and I had been scared for a long time about talking about what was going on, the implications of it, knowing that calling it out would bring a focus to it, that it would make me a bigger target. But I must say, it's a really hard thing to believe when you're in the midst of it. But breaking my silence and calling it out was the most empowering thing I've ever done in my life. It changed the power dynamics. It was actually in my hands now. I owned this. I wasn't going to be ashamed of it. I wasn't allowing this harassment to undermine me and to shame me. I actually owned it. I shamed the shamers. And I think that people saw that. And I was inundated with support from everyday Australians, women and men, so many decent men out there who were just shocked and horrified, or some who had seen it, as I was saying earlier, and were almost relieved that because I'd spoken about it, they could now talk about it too and say this wasn't on. I had a flood of emails and letters from people who told me their own stories, so similar. Blokes who had written in saying they'd seen it happen to people in their workplace, a woman who worked a few desks down at the office, or someone who'd had it happen to their daughter, or someone who'd had it happen to their wife. I also received a letter from a guy who, after he'd heard me speak out and articulate what had happened, had recognised that he'd done this himself to somebody else that he'd worked with 5 years earlier. And he'd written to me and said, I've gotten in contact with her and I've apologised. Now, that is amazing. That is social change happening before your very eyes. And it's that type of empowerment that just made me realise that, actually, this was the right thing to do. Of course, there was the repercussions. The slut shaming continued, and I had to take it to court. In fact, we went all the way to the High Court because he just couldn't accept that he was wrong. And I still won, and I won all the way through. And there was the stress of that and the anxiety that comes with that. And that wasn't a small thing to do. That was a really difficult thing to do. And if it's difficult for me as a public figure, I know that, defamation is not something that is in the hands of regular people and regular women at all. So I was very privileged, but it was still a really hard thing to do. But despite all of that, overwhelmingly, people were supportive and backed me.
And having lived that experience and all of that, would you do it again? Would you still choose to serve?
Yes, I would. I would, because we need women there, and we need opinionated women there, and we need women from a diverse group of backgrounds to be there. One of the things that clearly hasn't shifted enough is how we involve women from a more diverse cultural background into leadership positions and into genuine leadership positions, and to give them a voice in a lot of these conversations. I would never say don't do it, because it is well and truly one of the most important things if we're going to have the cultural shift we need. If we want equality for women and equality for all, then you can't shy away from it.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely the truth, isn't it? I mean, I think certainly reflecting on my own experience, I often think that if as a white middle-class woman, this is my experience, and it certainly hasn't been easy, and it has been tough for various reasons. And a lot of it, in many cases, as you say, is about, being afraid to have that voice and being afraid to say, that's not okay, that's not appropriate, or even to tell your story, if that's my experience, I can't imagine what other minority groups have, particularly when it comes to representation. Do you think there is a solution around getting women more positions of leadership, whatever their background is? Do you think there is a solution around that? I mean, people obviously debate quotas amongst other things. It's something that's huge. But if you look at Scandinavian countries, I mean, they're just kind of all over this in comparison to us. And
they are.
It works.
They are. Yeah. Look, I think quotas is a really important place to start. We need gender quotas on boards. We need reporting of that to be transparent. We need to be thinking about the gender balance when we think about kind of senior management positions as well. So, the next kind of level down from company boards, how we actually ensuring that the people who are in charge of the day-to-day reflect the best skills and abilities of a company. And so often you see women overlooked because a bloke's had the job and a bloke gives another bloke the next job. We need to kind of really be quite transparent about dealing with those biases. And we need quotas in when it comes to representation in politics. Simply leaving it to it will happen over time and a kind of complacency. We're running out of time. Actually, we've got some really big bloody issues we've got to deal with as a community, and we are running out of time. And when I look around the world at those countries where you have women in leadership as prime ministers or presidents or the head of international organizations, they are doing such a good job and bringing a different perspective to whether it is the climate and environment crisis, whether it's the humanitarian crises, whether it's how do we financially and sustainably get out of this COVID pandemic that we're in, as well as dealing with the health issues. Women bring a different perspective, and it's time for our perspective to be front and centre, because the way the world has been run and the way governments have been running things for too long is not working. So let's put some women in charge and get the job done. That's only going to happen if we've got, in the Australian context, if we actually have quotas. And obviously the Liberal Party needs some quotas. I think all parties need to do better at getting women next level of leadership. Of course, with that comes wanting to make sure there is a pathway, and it comes back to the question at the beginning, really, about how do we support people walking through that door, because you can't just put a woman up there and then go, okay, job done, that's it, everything else can carry on as normal. There needs to be a genuine commitment to supporting the success of women in leadership.
And I think supporting their choice to go into leadership, because, if you look at all the studies, particularly around millennial women, it's the support in getting them to make the choice or saying, I am good enough to, do these things. How did you make that decision? How did you decide to run and to get involved in politics? Was it about the team? Was it about the people behind you saying, you can do this?
It absolutely was about being encouraged. And one of my mentors back then and still to this day is Bob Brown, the former leader of the Greens. But I met him very early on, and he saw that I had the potential to be involved in a bigger way, and really encouraged me. And not one day has gone by where I've thought, if I had a question I needed or a doubt in my mind that I needed help with, that he wouldn't be there. And that's been really important. It's something that I've then gone, okay, well, how do I use my experience to help encourage other women to step forward? And regardless of what political party they are in, I'm not really, I think we need more women in politics. Obviously, I'd love more progressive women in politics, because I come from, I think that the progressive policies are what we need. But I want genuine debate, and I want to see every party progress, and that means we need women from all sides.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like, when you talk about politicians or parties needing to do better. I feel like industry needs to do better just as much. I mean, in our industry, we employ 1.2 million people, 55% of them are women. I think we've got less than 8% at CEO level, which is, pretty telling. And we're not good. We're not good at succession planning. We're not good at getting them from shop floors into head offices and saying, here are the skills, this is what you need, or even providing them with the support to make those decisions, which include things like equal pay and assistance with childcare and, other things that we know that they are going to need to move forward.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think even daring to have that conversation is where things have to start, right? Like the retail sector is predominantly women. Where is the pathway up to CEO and leadership position coming from, and who's getting out of the way to help that happen? Who's getting out of the way and who's getting behind to push to make that happen? I think that there's some really important conversations that need to be happening, and that's why what's happened, the narrative of what's been going on out of Canberra and in politics over the last few years is it's not just important for politics. It sets the tone for what should be expected and what is needed across the board, and whether that's in industry or in kind of the rest of the public service or in the non-government sector. It's important because it needs to set the path and set that standard. I think for the retail sector, there is such an obvious opportunity right now for women in your space to be backing each other and saying, hang on a minute, we have the influence and the power right now. There is a moment that is going on and we can't afford to waste this. And take the momentum. There's a reason why the conversation of women and the treatment of women is so high on people's radar right now. We're leading into a federal election in a month or so's time. Women voters are going to be thinking about the power of their vote in a way that they've never thought about it before. This is all positive. And I'd say to the retail sector and anyone, working or associated, that be part of this momentum. Don't miss the boat on this one.
We have time for one question, last question, and this is something that I ask everybody on this show. What are you reading and what are you watching at the moment?
I just finished the latest season of, the new season of Sex and the City, actually.
Oh, yes. Yeah. As you
I had to, I had to do that. And I'm not.
How did you feel about it?
I felt very conflicted. I felt very conflicted. It's not the same without Samantha.
No.
I think in some ways it just exposed how much, one's own growth in the world has gone. So it was a bit confronting in that sense. But, I used to be a big Sex and the City fan back in the beginning, so I felt like I had to do that. The other show that I've been watching is Succession, of course, which is just, the kind of intrigue and politics. And I'm obviously very interested in the issue of media and the power of, media in politics as well. So I've really enjoyed that. Reading at the moment, actually, I haven't started a new book for a while. The last book I read was actually Toxic, which is about salmon farming in Tasmania. That's shaken me a bit, actually, and we've got to do better in that space. So yes, I did try. I just remembered that I did try and pick up 3 Women. Have you read that?
I haven't, no.
Which is, I tried to pick that up over summer, and I really wanted to get into it, but I kept being distracted. But that in and of itself is a story of, 3 women from totally different worlds trying to navigate their way through this kind of cultural change of equality. So I think timely. Exactly.
Timely read, that's it. Well, thank you so much for your time. You have no idea how much I have enjoyed this conversation. And I can't wait to see all the amazing things that you do. So thank you so much for being on our show.
It's been a pleasure.
Well, we look forward to watching what happens next.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you, Dominique, and happy International Women's Day.
Happy International Women's Day.